Hey, what's going on everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech. And today, we're going to be talking about my updated Gruul Dinosaurs list that I've been working on for quite some time. And honestly, it's been quite a bit of time since the last time I actually talked about a dinosaur list here on the channel. So I figured, you want to know what? It's about time since I've shared one, so let's go ahead and do that today. And I'm really excited to talk about this deck. As always, I love dinosaurs. They're my favorite creature type in the entire game, so it makes sense that I really love talking about them. So, let's go ahead and start. So we're playing 30 creatures in this deck. Not all of them are technically dinosaurs, but I always like to start with the dinosaurs because after all, that's why people actually clicked on this video. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So, we're playing 4 copies of Marauding Raptor and 4 copies of Regal Imperiosaur as our early drops. So Marauding Raptor, I think, is the best card in the deck. Being able to have our creature spells cost 1 less to cast is very, very incredible. And then also whenever we play future dinosaurs, they take 2 damage, so there's a little bit of a downside to that, but pretty much all of our dinosaurs are really big, so there's not going to be much of a downside to that. And then also, if it's a creature, or if the creature is a dinosaur that was dealt damage, it gets +0 until end of turn, so it acts as a pseudo mana dork that also gets really, really big, which is sweet. And then Regal Imperiosaur, relatively new card from Aether Drift. It's a 5/4 for 3, so kind of like Steel Leaf Champion stats, and then gives our other dinosaurs +1/+1, which, although very simple, is very, very strong. So the other dinosaurs that we're playing in this deck, we're playing 4 copies of Ripjaw Raptor. 4/5 for 4. Whenever it's dealt damage, we get to draw a card, which is obviously really good with Marauding Raptor, because whenever Marauding Raptor, like the Ripjaw comes into play, Marauding Raptor deals 2 damage to it, gets the buff, and then Ripjaw Raptor draws a card from that, which is pretty darn strong. We're also playing 4 copies of Rampaging Raptor, a pseudo questing beast for the deck, trample and haste 4/4. We can fire breathe it for 3 mana to give it +2/+0, and then it has like the questing beast text where it can deal that much damage to a planeswalker or a battle. And then 4 copies of Bone Horde Dracosaur, newcomer to the deck. 5/5 for 5, basically a Baneslayer Angel, meaning if you don't kill this big gigantic first striking flyer, you're going to lose the game, just because you get so much value from a card like Bone Horde Dracosaur, being able to play cards off the top of your deck, which is pretty sweet, and then obviously you get additional value depending on what you actually exile, which is pretty darn sweet. So the rest of the creatures that we're playing in their deck, we're playing 6 elves in this deck, pretty straightforward for the most part. I'm only playing 6 because, well, we'll kind of talk about that in a minute, actually, why I'm only playing 6. But I think 6 is the correct number. But we're also playing 4 copies of Screaming Nemesis. So obviously, a lot of people know what Screaming Nemesis is. It's one of the best cards in Standard, one of the best cards in Pioneer currently, just because of how efficient it is as a card. A Boros Reckoner that's better costed with haste, that also has the anti-life gain text on it, which works really, really well in our deck because of Marauding Raptor. So Marauding Raptor says with Screaming Nemesis, whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target. So with Marauding Raptor, we obviously, we have Marauding Raptor in play. We play Screaming Nemesis for only 2 mana, and then this enters, we deal 2 damage to it, so then we get to deal 2 damage to any target. We can target our opponent with it, and then they can't gain life the rest of the turn. We can just target it at a creature or something like that. We can do something. It's just a really, really good card. I'm a huge fan of Screaming Nemesis in this deck. It's definitely overperforming. It's one of the newer cards in the deck that I've tried out in the past, but I decided to bring it back, and it has been fantastic. So the next thing we have to talk about is the non-creature spells. We're playing 7. I know that always looks like a 1 in this font, and it kind of bugs me a little bit. But anyways, we're playing 7 non-creature spells in our deck. So we're playing 4 copies of Reckless Rage and 3 copies of Commune with Dinosaurs. So Reckless Rage, I've always been a huge fan of, and I think it's really good in this deck, especially right now, where we're playing 8 enraged creatures, so we can get maximum value from a card like Reckless Rage, being able to do 4 damage to any creature an opponent controls for only 1 mana at instant speed is something we don't really have for the most part in the Pioneer format. Like, the thing is like Reckless Rage is one where there's technically a little bit of a downside by dealing 2 damage to one of our creatures, but most of the time, it is not going to be a downside at all. So we don't mind playing Reckless Rage at all. And then Commune with Dinosaurs is just fantastic. Obviously, being able to look at the top 5 cards of your library and reveal a dinosaur or land kind of helps us refill, kind of helps us set up our early turns so we can have more explosive turns, in like turn 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. It's also a great late game draw just because, we can dig a little bit deeper for a dinosaur to give us some more pressure. It's always just a really, really good card, and that's why I love the 3 copies of Commune in this deck. So those are all the main board cards except for the lands, which we're playing 23 lands in this deck. I normally haven't really gone over a lot of the lands in the past when I've done these videos, but I figured today I'd go ahead and go over those just because I really never talked about them in depth before. But a lot of it's pretty straightforward because, I mean, we're playing 4 Copperline Gorge, 4 Stomping Ground, 4 Carplusion Forest. It's just kind of stock for the most part, right? I mean, nothing too crazy for the most part. These are just some of the best dual lands you could play in the entire format. But we are playing 3 copies of Crag Crown Pathway. I like playing Carplusion Forest a little bit more than Crag Crown just because, you know, we have some spells like we have Regal Imperator that's green, and then we have Rampaging Raptor, which is 4 mana, which is red. So I want to make sure that we have a little bit more consistency in our mana base. That's why I chose the 4 copies of Crag Crown or Carplusion Forest over Crag Crown Pathway. Then we're playing 2 copies of Cavernous Souls. Cavernous Souls is such a fantastic card against the blue-white control decks. Sometimes it feels like I want more of these just because you run into blue-white control, and this is like the best card in the matchup. But regardless, I like the 2 copies of Cavernous Souls. And then 2 copies of Lair of the Hydra are always fantastic. All of our early game plays are green, so there's really no issue with playing Lair of the Hydra at all. The deck, it's just fantastic. We make some extra mana. We can activate the land if we need to, which is pretty good. And then we are playing 1 copy of Sekenza, 1 copy of Boseiju as our free channel lands. And then rounding out our lands, we're playing 1 basic mountain and 1 basic forest. And as our spicy basic lands of the day, I've been doing Elena Danner basics for quite some time now, just because I really love her artwork. And these lands are no exception to that. Huge bonus points, honestly, to these lands because Ikoria, obviously there's a lot of dinosaurs that are found on Ikoria. And then with the forest, this is the dinosaur forest from Jumpstart, which I've actually got a whole bunch of these signed from Elena Danner. I don't currently use them in my dinosaur deck, as crazy as it sounds, mostly just because I don't have like a matching mountain. So, hey, maybe next MagicCon I go to, I get a couple of these Ikoria basic lands here, and then I can get those signed by her, and then it makes sense, right? I'll be able to have them in the deck, which is pretty cool. But I really do love the Dinosaur Forest. It's one of my favorite forest artworks in the entire game. So the next thing we have to talk about is the sideboard, which I usually don't go into detail too much with the sideboard, but I figured today I wanted to change the template of how I normally do the dinosaur deck text. So I figured we'd go over the sideboard today. But one thing I have to mention though is with this sideboard, it's very customizable. If there's different cards that you think that you want to play instead of the ones I shared today, obviously no issues with that at all. Feel free to go and change up the sideboard if you think you're running into a specific deck on Arena that you want to, hate on a little bit more, or if you're running into specific decks in your metagame, need some extra help, like, oh, I'm running into small aggro decks, I think I want some Pyroclasms or Anger of the Gods, no problem, go ahead and swap those out. This deck is very customizable. So the first thing I want to talk about is Burst Lightning and Pick Your Poison. We're playing 2 copies of each of these. They're both fantastic. Burst Lightning is a great early game removal spell for like against the red decks and stuff. But with our deck, we have a very, very easy option of kicking this just because we have elves and 23 lands. So a lot of the time you're going to be kicking a card like this. And then Pick Your Poison is just good against so many different decks in the metagame. Most of the time it acts as a 1-mana naturalize, good against a number of different decks in the format. We're also playing 2 copies of Rampaging Ferocidon. Big fan of Rampaging Ferocidon. And I know what you're thinking, like, well, you're already playing Screaming Nemesis. Like, you already have anti-life gain. Like, why are you playing that? I really just like having this effect. It also being a dinosaur is obviously fantastic just because we can hit it with Community Dinosaurs. It works well with Marauding Raptor. That's why I'm playing Rampaging Ferocidon in the sideboard, just because sometimes you also want it against decks that go really, really wide, like, Oni Cult Anvil decks and stuff like that, or just Angels. Like, sometimes you just want more of this effect. We're also playing 2 copies of Tranquil Frillback. The card has definitely grown on me as of late. It's just fantastic. Being able to destroy an artifact or enchantment, exile a graveyard, or gain 4 life means that you bring this card in a number of different matchups, and I really love this in the sideboard, and that's why I've got 2 copies. And then rounding out our sideboard, we're playing 2 copies of Withered Runestone and 2 copies of Unlicensed Hearse as our main artifact, like hate cards. I really love Runestone because we're able to stop our opponent from putting permanents into play from like their library, for instance. So it stops cards like Storm of the Festival. Obviously stops, reanimation spells and stuff like that, which is also really good. Most notably, I decided to play this card over Grafdigger's Cage just because of the increase of Abzan Greasefang, Black-White Greasefang, just because they return the Perhelion from their graveyard to the battlefield, and Weathered Runestone stops all of those shenanigans. We're also playing the 2 copy of Unlicensed Hearse because guess what? It exiles graveyards. That's why we're playing it, and then it also can turn into a creature, which is kind of cool. So yeah, definitely a big fan of the Unlicensed Hearse. And then we're playing 3 copies of Magebane Lizard, a card that I really, really love in a deck like this. We bring this in against all the mid-range and control decks. I also like to bring it in against the, I call them spell slinging red decks. If they're more of like the creature-based mono red aggro, I don't bring this in. But if they're going more on the burn strategy, then I really love to bring in Magebane Lizard, just because it can really hate on those type of different decks, deal a whole bunch of extra damage to them, and then all of a sudden we're the ones that's trying to take them out of the game quicker than they're taking us out of the game. So definitely a huge fan of the 3 copies of Magebane Lizard. Okay, so the next thing that we have to talk about in this deck is the recent changes. I don't normally talk about this on the normal deck text, but just because of how the deck has changed a little bit since the last time I've shared this list with you, I wanted to take a minute to talk about why I made the specific changes that I did. So the first thing I got to talk about is why I'm not playing a Herd Heirloom in Pugnacious Hammerskull. And it's really simple with Herd Heirloom. Half the reason I was playing it, well, there's a couple of reasons I was playing it, I guess. But the main reason I was playing it was because I wanted some extra card advantage that I wasn't getting in the deck. But now that we're playing the full 4 copies of Ripjaw Raptor, it's a lot easier to draw cards in this deck. It's not to say that Herd Heirloom is still not good. This card is like, it's going to come back in the list at some point. This is just what I decided is currently the best thing to be doing. Like, at least with, what am I trying to say? With Ripjaw Raptor and such with drawing cards. So, Herd Heirloom is a really, really good card. I've won a lot of games with it, but I'm not currently playing it in the list. I might try it again in the future, but with the power level of Screaming Nemesis not really working well with Herd Heirloom, just in general, I figured it was worth it to go ahead and cut it. Pugnacious Hammerskull, a card that I love so much. I love this card. I mean, it's a 6/6 for 3, but the really big issue with a card like this is the fact that how much removal is in the metagame. It's hard for a card like Pugnacious Hammerskull to really stick around. The issue I keep running into with this card against midrange and control, for instance, like Rakdos Demons was blue-white control, is this card just gets too many stun counters on it, and it's just awkward. Half the time a 6/6 for 3 vanilla creature just isn't cutting it right now in the metagame, just as a whole. Screaming Nemesis, I feel like, is a card that we get a lot more value from in general, even though it is not a dinosaur. But it still works really well with Marauding Raptor 2, like obviously both of these cards do, just because playing a 2-mana 6/6 is pretty darn insane. Again, similar to Herd Heirloom, this card is not written off completely. It's a card that I'm just not currently playing right now. But don't be surprised if this card does come back. I really do love Pugnacious Hammerskull. It will return into the list soon, just not as of right now. Just the metagame needs to change a little bit. So the other cards that I cut from the deck, Regisaur Alpha, which it really pains me. Regisaur Alpha has pretty much been a player in this deck since day one, and it's kind of similar to Pugnacious Hammerskull. It's not that the card is bad, it's the fact that it just doesn't quite fit the role that I need that Bonehorde Dracosaur does in this current metagame. So, Regisaur Alpha, making 2 dinosaurs means it's a lot more explosive than Bonehorde Dracosaur. If you're just trying to kill your opponent as quick as you can, which generally this deck is trying to do, like, you can play Regisaur Alpha as a much more explosive card. But the biggest thing with this deck, and one thing I've been running into recently, is with Marauding Raptor. It's the best card in the deck. It deals damage to all of our other dinosaurs, which is not too bad if you have 1. But if we play 2 copies of Marauding Raptor, it does not allow us to really go fully explosive, because Regisaur Alpha, if we have 2 Marauding Raptors in play, it just eats the alpha and the token. So essentially we pay 3 mana to buff our creatures, which with Bonehorde Dracosaur, we can pay 3 mana to buff our creatures, but it also survives 2 Marauding Raptor triggers, which is super duper important with this deck. Regisaur Alpha can survive 2 Marauding Raptor triggers if we have a Regal Imperiosaur in play, for instance, but other than that, that's really the only instance where that does work. So Regisaur Alpha is a card that is going to come back in the future. It also helps that, like we lost a creature with haste in, the token in the Regisaur Alpha, but we are playing Screaming Nemesis. So it doesn't feel like we really lost any hasters, but just keep that in mind with Regisaur Alpha. The card is still very, very good. It's just not currently in the list right now. And again, I feel like I'm a broken record by saying this with Ghalta, but it's the same thing. It just doesn't line up in the metagame right now. The biggest issue with Ghalta is if our opponent's, using a lot of timely removal spells to, stem the bleeding, not help us get off the ground a little bit, and then we draw Ghalta when we just can't cast it, it just gets so awkward. There is a lot of games, though, where, like, Ghalta is one of the only ways we can win a particular game if we happen to draw it, and then we get to survive, or, like, if our opponent doesn't have a Doomblade, we're going to win the game. There's a lot of those games that happen with Ghalta, but just as of right now, again, it's just, there's too much mid-range. There's too much control going around right now, which makes Ghalta not that good. If the metagame gets a lot more aggressive, don't be surprised if Galta, Regisaur Alpha, and Pugnacious Hammerskull make a return to the deck. It's not that they're bad, they just don't fit the current metagame as it is right now, and I wanted to kind of talk about that in this video. Like, it's not that these cards are bad, and if you still want to play them, there's no issues with that. It's just based on where the metagame's at, I decided to make those changes. So the last thing that I have to talk about, or second to last thing, is the tips and strategy section. Things that, maybe things you didn't really realize or understand the value of it in this deck. Just things that are going to help you play this deck a little bit better. And I've got two things that I want to talk about. So the first thing is, which a lot of people know this, but I always have to mention this, Marauding Raptor is the MVP. It is the best card in the deck, and it's not close. Even when we weren't playing all the different Enrage cards, this card was still really, really good, but on top of that now, it's just absolutely insane how much value we get from a card like Marauding Raptor. It helps us play all of our creatures cheaper, it gets bigger as we play our dinosaurs, it swings in for a lot of damage really, really quick. The card is awesome. I actually had a video or a match on stream the other day where I was playing against a deck where it was Rakdos Demons, and I had a Marauding Raptor, and they played a Fear of Missing Out, but then they pitched a Fatal Push, which I thought was really surprising, and then that whole game, they never killed the Marauding Raptor, and they pretty much died because they never actually did. So a lot of people just don't understand the value of the card. It is the best card in the deck. So the next thing I have to talk about is make sure you get your Enrage going. After all, like, we're essentially playing Enrage Dinosaurs. Try to get that engine going. You know, Marauding Raptor, we want to highly prioritize a card like that. Screaming Nemesis and Ripjaw, they want to be dealt damage. So with Reckless Rage, make sure when we have those, we take advantage of it. We make sure we're prioritizing the fact that we can deal extra damage or draw extra cards with cards like Reckless Rage and Marauding Raptor. We're not just trying to just vanilla, you know, like play all of our creatures out and see what happens. We want to make sure we sequence everything properly. We keep mana open for a Reckless Rage. Even if we don't have a Reckless Rage, our opponent doesn't know that necessarily. So just make sure we're playing things correctly and we get the Enrage going so we can get some extra value, which in the end is going to really help us win the game, especially against all those different mid-range and control decks. So the last thing that I have to talk about here too with the tips and strategies, I forgot that I did have a third one, is Bone Horde is worth the price of admission. This card is very, very strong. I've always known it was a really good card. I played it in Standard when it first came out, and this card in the current iteration of the deck is so strong. There is a lot of games that I won just because I was playing a card like Bonehorde Dracosaur over a different 5-drop like a Gonosaur Rex, as well as Regisaur Alpha. Bonehorde Dracosaur is an amazing card. You gotta try it out. If you don't have the copies, I would highly suggest picking them up if you're thinking about playing dinosaurs, because this card is incredible. I'm a huge fan of Bonehorde Dracosaur. I would say it's slowly creeping up as my favorite card from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and card that's currently in Standard. The card's just awesome. You gotta give it a try. So the last thing that I have to talk about here today is the budget options for the deck, which it's pretty simple. You can swap out Screaming Nemesis for Pugnacious Hammerskull. You know, Screaming Nemesis, they are going for about 25 bucks a piece, which is pretty darn pricey, especially for a Standard and Pioneer card. So feel free to switch that out for the Pugnacious Hammerskull if you want to. You can also swap out Bonehorde Dracosaur for Regisaur Alpha, as well as a Gonosaur Rex. I think both are fantastic options, in the sense that, you know, playing 2 Marauding Raptors and being able to survive the damage, a Gonosaur Rex also does fit that slot. So you can play either one of those just fine, and you're not going to have any issues with that. The current list, as it's constructed right now, is $311 US. Mostly went up because of the playset of Screaming Nemesis, which is $100 for a playset of those. So if you take out the Screaming Nemesis, we're looking at a little over 200 bucks, and that's also including playing Cavern of Souls and Beseiju and all the other pricey cards. But if you take a lot of those pricey cards out, I was able to get the budget list down to $89 US, which is pretty darn cheap, which I would say is a more, quote, traditional version of dinosaurs. It's very, like, you're playing pretty much all dinosaurs in the deck, and you're kind of going more of like an old school approach to it, if that's what I guess we'll call it that, an old school approach to it. But overall, I really love Gruul Dinosaurs. It's one of my favorite decks that in Magic, not even just Pioneer, in Magic, and I really wanted to share my updated list with you today. So that takes us to the end of the video here. Thanks so much for watching. The deck lists are in the description below if you'd like to check them out for yourself. Huge shout out to our channel members, Ralph, Matt, Arcadius, Ray, Gary, Saranoki, Michael D, our premium channel member, The Comic Colb, Jeremy P, BG Stilts, and Darren M. If you're interested in being a channel member, it starts at $1 US a month, and you get access to the exclusive Commander Crane Discord, as well as other features here on the channel. So, I'm Commander Crane, thanks for watching this video, and hope to catch you in the next one.